What is globalization? The definition you see up on the board is the definition used in AP Human Geography. In AP Human Geography, you learn how there are two forces, when you're talking about culture in the world. Globalization, which is the fight to make everything the same, which means everyone will speak the same language, everyone will dress the same, and every part of the physical environment will look very similar. The other force is the fight to preserve folk culture. These are cultures that are not mainstream, and they are very small, homogeneous groups of people, which means that they share very similar cultural ideals and share very similar beliefs, and they dress very similarly. My claim is that globalization has a negative impact on a country's culture. If a country is not globalizing like the United States, they're very susceptible to outside influences. For example, the United States has big multinational corporations like Ford. Ford does not only have operations in the United States, Ford has operations in Germany, and South Korea, and in China, and other countries, and it's not only in the automotive industry, it's in every industry you can think of. Emmanuel Wallerstein is most well known for his Wallerstein's world systems theory. Even though it was made in the 70s, it shows how the world economy functions, and even though there has been countries added to the map, they would still fall under the same category. The countries in orange are core countries. These are countries with the strongest economy in the world. These are your countries like the United States, Australia, and Japan. So if their economies were to take a hit, it would affect the world's economy dramatically. The peripheral countries are the weakest countries speaking in terms of economics. These are your countries like Mali, Colombia, and Panama and Nicaragua. These are the countries that are the poorest and have the lowest GDP and GNI, excuse me. And the semi-peripheral countries are the countries that don't have the weakest economies, but they're not the strongest. These are countries like Brazil, Russia, and Mexico. So they have some wiggle room in terms of economics, but they don't have as much as core countries. Globalization can lead to core countries usually exploiting semi-peripheral and peripheral countries. For instance, you would likely to see something about how the United States uses its economic power to persuade Mexico and Nigeria to do things for them, whether it be labor, goods, natural resources, or other things like them making things and shipping it to them, because the United States has more wiggle room. And Mexico can exploit other countries like Guatemala and Belize, who are peripheral countries, because Mexico has more wiggle room since they're a semi-peripheral country. But Mexico cannot go to the United States and influence their culture as heavily as the United States can influence their culture and economics. What I just said is one of the main things about neocolonialism. Neocolonialism is the idea that a country uses its economic, political, and cultural pressures to influence or control another country. The best example of this is the Eastern Bloc during the Cold War. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union did not directly own Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Bulgaria, and Romania, but they controlled them. They knew what was going on in their governments, and they knew what their economy was doing, so they became puppet states. And like with neocolonialism, you can affect trade, because the Eastern Bloc countries were told to only trade amongst themselves and not go into the Western Bloc and trade with countries like Western Germany, the United States, or Canada. And this also can affect urbanization, because if you're talking about trade, and if you're trading only among certain groups of people, you do not have the ability to grow your cities as much as you can if you can trade with anyone you want, because factories will pop up in cities, making the area transition from a more rural area to a more city-like area. So with this, if a country is only trading with its neighbors, they do not have the exact same opportunity as if they can use their ports and trade with the outside world. Mark R. Montgomery says by 2050, fully 2/3 of their inhabitants are likely to live in urban areas. Almost all of these are expected to take place in cities and towns of poor countries. When he's talking about there, he's talking about the world population. Even though this is only 31 years away, and this might seem like a long time, it's really not, because the past 10 years have gone by faster because technology has increased in its ability to do things. So therefore, it makes things easier, but it can also affect how industry is functioning. This leads me to my counterclaim. Jane McGonigal is a world-renowned game designer who has worked with credible organizations like the New York City Public Library and the International Olympics Committee, among others. Says if we train people to do things in a virtual situation, then they will be able to use those skills in real-world issues. The problem with this is that in certain countries like North Korea, they have no internet. And in countries like China, the government controls what you can and cannot look up. So in the United States, this would work, but since we are a more developed country, why would we need to use this? Why would this affect us as much as if someone in Nigeria or in North Korea or in other poor countries could use this to better themselves? And also, in games, you have the luxury of pressing the reset button, whereas if the United States' economy or another country's economy crashes, then there is no reset button, and then the country would have to consume massive amounts of debt in order to get themselves back up to a functioning level. Now with this, what does debt and culture have to do together? Actually, when a country is in debt, people are more focused on rather surviving than thriving. When you're surviving, you're just trying to get your basic essentials: food, water, clothes, and shelter. So you really don't care about what you dress like, how you speak. You just want to make sure that you are surviving. And if a country's economy is tanking, then it will affect their culture because people don't have enough money to spend on things on like movies or like fashion or makeup or things like that. And also, when a country's economy tanks, you can lose cultures because, like I said, when people are trying to survive, they don't really care. They just want to get through it. And like I said earlier, there is no reset button in the real world. And when a culture is lost, like certain Native American tribes, we cannot revive them. Like the tribe like the Navajo, we don't know what's going to happen because there's only very few left, and they have no written system, so we don't know what's going to happen or how it's going to affect us when the last few of them die off. This leads me to my solutions. One of them is set laws in place that protect culture. This has been proven to work because in countries like France, even though France is a developed country, they have an official language which is French. You have to take all standardized testing in French. And also on the French radio, they have certain time slots allotted for French artists only. That way they make sure the French language does not die off, and if a language dies off, therefore their culture soon follows. The problem with this is that the United States does not have an official language. We have a national language, English. You do not have to take anything in English if you don't want to or if you cannot. You can take your standardized testing in Spanish or whatever language you are most comfortable with. And also another limitation with this is that this would require legal action and possibly amending the Constitution. Another solution is to have people be aware and learn about different cultures. A limitation with this is that you'd have to teach people, and some people are no longer in school, and if you're retired, most people would not want to go back to school. And also, that would require more money that some countries may or may not have. But if this were to happen, people would become more open-minded about what they're doing and learn about, hey, that's not okay if we do this, but if we do this, it might protect that culture. In conclusion, if we were to set laws in place that were to protect culture, we would not stop globalization because it can never be stopped, but we might slow the impacts to a point where they may be so minute that they may be unnoticeable.
Okay, so 2 questions for you, Nathan. The first one is, how valid and reliable are the sources you've used? How do you know? And which sources didn't work?
The sources that I used that I knew were reliable were the ones from the stimulus sources because we used them in the IWA, and since they've already been checked, they worked with this. And also the thing about the world systems theory coming from human geography, you talk about that a lot in the economics unit. So that worked. And then certain things that I knew that were not reliable, some things from my paper, like I had a couple of journalistic sources that were obviously biased politically, and it was showing one side, like it was showing how, it was saying like how rural culture and how conservative culture is pretty much invalid in today's world, and that also didn't work with my presentation.
Okay, and then your second question is, what advice would you have for other researchers who consider this topic?
My advice would be to take human geography because if you take it, it gives you a leg up because this is all you study. You study how culture affects the world, not only in a physical aspect, but also like in an ideological aspect, because if you learn about someone's culture, then you know what and what not to do.
Okay.